In the end, the player order actually stays exactly the same. The first three players, the first player with the pen, remember, he's kind of looking at a long-term situation rather than for short-term gains, which is usually a mistake in an 18xx game, but we'll see how it works here. I've always kind of liked the pen in this game. Well, in general, and in this game, I like what it has with the call. So he's only at 18. The B&M usually, was designed to be a short-term moneymaker. He's really shafted, having two trains, losing stock value, really bad things happening. On top of that, he only pulled in 22 bucks. C&O is a mini pen right now, even though it has more tokens than the pen, or more cubes than the pen for the overall. But it's not in as good a position as the pen for what it's trying to do. But he's making a little bit more money, so he's a little ahead of that. He's making a little more money because he went to to a larger city as his second play, basically. The rest of the players all pulled in a total of 50 for the turn, so their positioning stays exactly the same. And now we slide over to the stock round market, and we have to figure out what is worth buying, who needs to throw money into their companies, because that's a big factor here. Say the pen, he's low on cash. Well, he can throw an influx of cash, except nobody has much money. 50 bucks isn't enough to buy anything. So unless somebody wants to dump their company, I think things are probably going to stay the same. So as we move through the market round, essentially nobody did anything. The only person who really wanted to change their position, who's absolutely miserable about where they are, is the guy holding the B&Ms. He wanted this as a short-term profit company. It's not serving that at all. He has some options. He could have sold some shares of B&Ms and perhaps bought some. In fact, he may. Let's see. If he sells 2 shares of B&M at 120, can he afford NYNH? Well, he could sell 1 share and afford some NYNHs. But the problem is then he loses $5 a share because he's the president. Without being able to get 2 better shares, he's just going to live with it. And basically stick with it and take the pain. It's not a good situation. What if he sold 3? What could he get? He's making some money off of it, and he can conceivably make some stock value increases as well. So turning those shares in, I'd say 3 for 2, it's just not going to do him that much good. And at the best, it's still going to put him in a position well behind 2 people who are heavily invested in it. So it can't be his route. It could be a temporary route to another company, but it can't be his route to getting ahead at this point. So he's just going to stick with his B&Ms, but he knows he's lost at this point. His mistake has caught him. NYNH runs for what it runs for. It's the 70 a share, nothing's changed. They could have built some track, but where they want to put their track is right here in Philadelphia, and they can't build there until the pen makes it to Pittsburgh. Speaking of the pen, they're the next railroad. Now, because the C&O didn't lay any pressure on them, there is some risk here, which is to say if the 3 train comes out. But the pen has the option to grab this call and still be able to get this one most likely. See how many 2 trains are out there. There's only 2 out there. The C&O is going last. I don't think I can afford to take that call, so I think I have to build the track at this point. It means a little cash for me that I lose, and I don't have the money for another train, obviously. But what it means is, well, I'm in a safer position. Again, I'm foregoing future profits. Of course, 60% of the company is not in my hands. Somebody can grab that, or depending on where the priorities end up, and I could end up not holding a lot of my company when it makes that big money. I could end up not getting huge advantages for the sacrifice I'm making right now. I'd love to get 100%. It's not going to happen. You get 100% of something, it usually means it's not terribly good. Or you had a lot of money to begin with to throw into it right away. All right. and the pen pays out. It's still making the same. It's not going to change its position because we haven't gone through a shift. That 20 bucks doesn't help me terribly much right now. I'm just going to pay it out, maybe get a little extra cash. One thing to note, the Pen didn't have enough money to build another track. Otherwise, Baltimore would have been a great place to go. They didn't even have that 10 bucks. One reason why maybe they didn't want to do what they did. But again, it's playing on the safe side. Now, after them, we see the NYC went and they built a couple of track and they paid out their money. Get some cash in here, get some cash in here. They think they're going to be able to buy a train fairly quickly. Although they only have 60 bucks right now. If they swallow next time, they'll have enough money not to buy a train next time, but to buy a train the time after. Alternatively, though, they have enough cash to buy another certificate, which is good enough. And that's probably where they'll go rather than swallowing, because it's nice to just keep floating money into your own pocket, too. The B&M, however, has more problems. And they did swallow their 20 bucks. They're trying to come up with enough cash to buy this train. He's not getting it off of 2 bucks a share, 8 bucks. He's not going to get to another certificate of B&M. If he can't float the B&M, though, see, his decision to hold the B&M is what kind of determined to swallow here. But now he's making it worse and worse because he's not getting any cash. But it's not like his stock value is hurting. Now we're on the C&O, and the C&O would like a lot of things. Who wouldn't? He would like to expand his income is the primary thing, which is just the trick in this game, to get to the point where you can expand it. So he's got 40, 50, 55, 59 bucks in his treasury. He's only making a buck. Now he could maybe increase that. He's only got 2 trains. If he hit Baltimore, he would be making a little bit more money. On the other hand, the coal runs are where he wants to go, but he doesn't have enough cash for the coal runs yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 30 bucks of my precious cash to get into those cities. That allows me to make some more money. I can't buy a train, obviously. So now my run with 2 1 trains is 30 plus 30 is 60. Ooh, this goes downhill for a while, but then Washington goes back up. So I'm always going to be kind of making about this. So I'm at 60 bucks base. Minus 40 puts me to 20. If I pay this out, I get some stock value. I think that's worth it. So I'm gonna pay out. It's only 2 bucks a share, the same as other people have snubbed their nose at. But the extra stock value is worth it, even though that 20 bucks will help me reach that 80 a little quicker. I think what I need to do, I don't know. I'm doing so much worse than the Pen with its 1 train. Buying that second 1 train definitely is hurting the 2 companies that did it. After the NYNH paid out its 7 a share, this massive amount of money that it's cranking out, we get over to the Pen, and it's time to start cranking the Pen. And I'll steal this coal marker. I put it over here on my company thing. It's just gone. No one else has a right to take it. And now I'm going to be running my train. Well, let's see. I've got a single 1 train that allows me to run at 40 a share. I got another 40 from that coal. That puts me up to 80. Minus 20 puts me up to, not a share, puts me up to 60. And I want to pay that out because I'm making more money. So I'm going to pay out 6 bucks a share. And we're going to see some pretty good money start flowing into the treasury. Maybe enough to build more track or even buy a train in the near future. Push through the rest of the operating round. We see the NYC. How did they increase their income? Oh, how they ended up here. They shouldn't be. Right. They should be back here. The Penn increased its income. There's no question there, right? The Penn pushed its up to 6 a share by paying out. They pushed the thing forward. The NYC paid out, but it didn't increase its income. It's just building more and more track westward in the hopes of eventually having a really powerful route. But they don't quite have enough money for that second train. They have tons of cities they could operate off of. They could have swallowed and taken the money for that second train, but they're going to be able to throw the cash in the Treasury. The C&O is in a similar position, but not quite as good, and they had to swallow just like the B&M had to. And they're still not going to be ready to push into here and get the advance that they're going to get off the call. The Penn's in pretty good shape. They're going to start cranking money. Of course, here's the problem. People see that the Penn's in pretty good shape, and they might be willing to buy shares of it. It's not as good as NYNH as an investment, though, at least as a short-term investment. NYNH is still cranking out a little bit more money, but it's obvious the Penn's has room for improvement where the NYNH does not. So, and the B&M, I believe, actually paid out this time. They have enough cash on hand for that next train, but they didn't have it at the beginning of their turn. They didn't have it till they pay out. And there's some room for leeway. There's another train available, so they can upgrade, and they'll be hitting 4 cities already, so they're in pretty good shape. They can stretch eventually into New York, but they don't have that kind of money yet. So they're going to be making a little jump forward that the C&O is not going to make. And that puts us at the end of the operating rounds to the market round. I got to count up and see where the market. So the Penn run boosted them up enough so that they're no longer in first place. They're 30 with $70, and you can see that's quite a bit ahead of the two who are kind of foundering with 2-1 trains. The 4 and 5, fourth and fifth player, well, the fourth and sixth player are tied at 106. That ends up being higher. The NYC has fallen behind a little bit, so he's got the 4th choice. And that means, gee, if you make a lot of money, you end up not in as good a stock position in terms of making your choices. I like that in some ways. It may be too drastic a catch-up mechanism, though, in the sense that you may have to try to circumvent it, essentially, by swallowing to make sure that you get the purchase that you want to make. In particular, there's some worrisome possibilities here, like ownership of the Penn. Somebody could dump their NYNH and buy the Penn and have 60% of what is right now a better company, where this guy has suffered to get there. Now he gets his first buy on it, so he's going to be able to buy a certificate before those guys get to. That's kind of nice. If these guys had held off and not paid off as much, he may have been able to exchange for the Penn, and that might have been a really, really sweet deal. Of course, then the NYNH has tons of money that he forewent. He can start a new company with that cash. You know, there's always a trade-off involved. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe that drought was too long. These two guys can't buy anything, but it turns out the Penn didn't have enough money to buy anything either. They only had $50, and the cheapest share out there is a $60 B&M. The Penn is going to cost them $74 to get. NYC had enough cash on hand to buy a Penn. They couldn't do the swap because there's no one else holding their company. But the NYNH president, he's in a sweet location. He's got a company that he's not sure is bad, but it's dead-ended. And the Penn is looking tremendous right now. So what he's going to do is NYNHs are worth $74 a share, the same as the Penn. So he can sell 4 shares of these, buy 4 of the 5 remaining shares of the Penn, and he has enough money for the 5th one. Which means he'll take the presidency of the Penn away. He'll dump the NYNH. He's selling shares of it, which drops its stock value, hurting the new president, the poor sucker who was investing in it. Is it that poor sucker? No, it's not a bad railroad. But this is not what he wanted. This guy wanted the opportunity to be the guy getting out of it. And as it turns out, it's the president who's going to dump the company and move to greener pastures, pastures that someone else built for him. And he's clearly in the lead now, right? If there was any question about it, this guy has 4 shares of Penn. He's been working the game to build that up. This guy is going to end up with 5 shares of that company that's been built up, directorship of it, and a good position overall, probably the best in the game. Well, our new president of the NYNH decides not to go for the next best thing available, which would be an NYC. Instead, he buys a C&O because it has the most opportunity to screw with the Penn. Now, this puts the owner of the NYC in a bit of a bind. He has to sell a Penn share. Notice the stock price doesn't go down. And he buys an NYC share to get the cash that he needs to run his company into his company. It's not too big a hose. But that means now we run down to the Penn owner. He wants to buy this up with what? Well, he can't do it with his own cash, but he wants to make sure it's not in this pool because otherwise his stock value will drop. So he'll buy it out of the Penn treasury. There's no harm in that. If somebody else wants to sell or buy pens, that's fine. But they can buy it from here and he doesn't lose any money. 1870 has a buyback option, but it ends up losing the company money when they re-release the stocks, or at least they re-release them at a discount, essentially. So they have to hold them for a while. Here, they're able to be bought again for the same price that the company's paying. So there's no possible harm in it. It's just protecting the share value there. Gets us to the end of the market round. We're moving into the business round now. The NYNH did not manage to protect its shares, so it drops another space down. It's just plummeting. Now, you might ask, well, could he have saved it? No, he couldn't. He didn't have enough money to buy 3 shares of this with the company money. If he could have done that, he probably would have bought another share himself. But as it stands, he doesn't want to buy partial shares of this. Leave these out here. They're not harming anyone. Although his company could make more capital in the treasury if he's paying out. The thing is, there's no real value to spending this money. I might be able to use this extra capital to buy a train. The only problem, well, if this just sits out here, his stock value is just going to keep going downward. So he's got to make a choice at some point, but he doesn't have to make it right now because he couldn't clear it out. So now we're moving into the business round, and we'll be starting off with a new starting company with the Penn going first. Open up the new operating round with the Pennsylvania under new ownership, and they do something kind of extreme. $100, $200 to build to here. No new trains. They didn't want to buy that 2 train because they'd have more capacity. They need more capacity than that in the long run, and in the short run, they'd have too much rail capacity. So it just seemed like better to stay at even payouts, and they paid out their money, and claim the rest of the coal. This puts the C&O in a dangerous position, but the C&O can build 2-track. And the C&O could conceivably do boink, boink, and put a challenge on, except they don't have that kind of money. They have the money to move in here, but they really don't have the money to try to steal things from the Penn. So the Penn has achieved a dominance in the coal market, I believe. At least the C&O has enough money to take one. I was hoping that influx of money would help them cut the Penn off, but this aggressive move undoes that. For the NYC, they just built more track, but they also bought themselves a second train. And that enabled them to push their income up to $9 a share, which of course they paid it out so that they could get the, increased value turn extra money. Now, they still have more city capacity than trains by far. They're just running 4 here. They've still got 3 more cities they could hook up if they needed, that they could service if they had the trains. But they're pushing their way further west to the value of Chicago, which they really want to get, maybe St. Louis, Cincinnati. There's some big city values out here that in the long run are worthwhile, and it's not too expensive to grab them. The track is fairly cheap. The problem, well, they have a limitation on the number of cubes, but they're one of the bigger companies and can get away with this. And they're also playing kind of a long-term game, just like the Penn was. On the other hand, they're making money off their long-term game, They made it early enough that they have control of the company and are making the most cash off of it. That may put them in a position where they can chase this. So now we're on to the C&O, and we'll see what they can salvage from the situation, essentially. And then kind of the loser company, B&M, and finally the things are polished off with the C&O making a surprise move of their own. They bought a 2-train, the $100 2-train there, instead of moving into here. So now this coal is available to the pen as well if it has the $80 to spend on it. The C&O didn't have enough cash to build track as well as build the train. Now building the train allowed them to do a quick run, which they paid out, increasing their stock value. It brought in where this pen is going to have to buy a 3-train if they want to buy a train, but that's actually what they wanted. Who it really hosed was the poor B&M, who had enough money for that 2-train but not enough for the 3-train, and they ended up using their money to get into New York, increasing their own income up to a big 3 a share, and that increased their stock value. The NYNH didn't have enough money to grab the train. They're very close. They'll have enough for one of the later ones, and even if they turned in one of these two, if they turned in both, they could have done it. They need some extra money to get into Philadelphia as well. It's not a lot, but they can't get there yet until the pen goes to Pittsburgh. So it's kind of an interesting lock that the pen puts on the board. By going for the coal, they prevent anybody from crossing those cities very easily. So now we push into the second round, and we see the power of the pen continuing. I cheated with the B&M. They can't get into New York. So they get their $60 back that they put in there. And they're not going to make $3 a share. They're going to make $2 a share. And they don't go up in value. But they're on top of the NYNH because it made it down. I've got to rearrange the cash to handle that. They couldn't build track going in here because there's already 2 people there, and we did not make it into phase 3 yet. We're real close, but we didn't make it. Well, we end up with, let's see, the pen built into here, obviously. The NYC, I believe, swallowed. Let's see what they have for cash. No, they paid out, but they're continuing their build towards Chicago. The C&O paid out, but they're not getting any bonuses anymore. They don't have the cash to make it here, but they managed to get enough cash into the owner's hands that he can buy another certificate. But here's the problem. He can't challenge these. If he went into 2 of them, he'd get 1. But if he doesn't go into any, if he only goes into 1, that's the one that Pennsylvania is going to convert over. And the pen's going to go before him and convert one of those first, which means there's only 1 left anyway. So it's just going to be a tough haul that can't be won by him. For the NYNH, they were able to come up with the cash for that 3-train, so they instituted a phase change here. And they went last, actually, after the B&M. So the B&M didn't get to take advantage of that phase change or get adversely affected by it. Now, it's not that big a bonus for the NYNH because they got to keep a cube here for Philadelphia. They want to go into Philadelphia, and they can't reach it yet. They only have 1 more expansion they can make, and there's nothing next to them that's worth much except Philadelphia. So they couldn't use their full train capacity, but they're pretty much done other than building that piece of track. The NYNH is tapped out here at its $80 or whatever. It'll make it a little higher, but not much. And then it starts degrading in value as, the cost of maintaining 2 trains goes up. Eventually, maybe it'll have enough cash to buy a single train and consolidate with a 5-train. Finally, over here with the B&M, poor them. I mean, they're just so hosed. I believe they swallowed because he's just not got enough money to do anything with. But he doesn't have enough money after swallowing either. His company is just so hosed here, and I don't know what to do with it. When you get into this kind of losing position, it can happen in an 18xx game, and obviously it happens here, where you just, end up making some bad initial investments making some bad initial decisions, and now you're stuck in the game forever. You know, on the bright side, this is a shorter game, but he's going to be facing, let's see, the phase change put him up to 30, 70. He's making the same money. He's going to lose money, which is going to drop his stock value more. I mean, it's a horrible little death spiral that goes on here. All right, so after I calculate how much money everybody's got, we'll start the stock round. Okay, had to make sure I didn't check this beforehand. I calculated out my values here, and we got a little bit of a surprise. So the number one is the lowest amount of money, the Boston and Maine, but number two goes over to the Penn. So you can see it's not a pure balancing mechanic here, because if you do swallow, and the Penn had to, you can end up in a position where you're still doing very well in the game, but you have this opportunity to make an early purchase. And that's what I was kind of alluding to as to being able to play around with those. I don't think that's usually going to be a good idea to do that just for that reason. But it could be an additional little piece of information to help you decide. All right, well, we'll see where the money starts dropping. Because now, excuse me, we're in the third period, which means these companies are now available for starting. Now that's important because things like Chicago, St. Louis, and maybe to a lesser extent Fort Wayne, but the Chicago and St. Louis are high value territories that can now start building their rails out. So we can get money in a way that isn't really available. Some of these others, like the Erie or the B&O, aren't very attractive right now at this point in the game. They may not be terribly bad, but there's openings for more interesting stuff to show up here rather than on those eastern lines, which have largely already have rails on them. That doesn't change their value. It's just there's this boost up here that is why, say, the NYC is heading this way instead of just servicing the north. And the B&M player takes that opportunity right away, dumps 3 of his shares of B&M, picks up the nickel rate up here, and it's not going to be enough to help him place better than last, probably. But the feeling is, hey, I'm just stuck with this piece of crap. Let's get rid of it. Let's start something new and exciting. Maybe we'll bone some people. Maybe we'll give opportunities to people who wouldn't have it. Well, one of the people who just got an opportunity is the number 2 player. If he had a pile of money, he could pick up 4 or 5 shares and grab control of it. He doesn't have that kind of money. It would mean giving up the Penn, and the Penn is relatively well established for a very good growth rate right now. He's not going to want to do that. Question, of course, is, does he want to be the first person to grab this? Because it's likely to go. That's probably the best purchase out there. The problem, of course, is then he's not collecting money ever into the treasury except by a declared swap. Penn player doesn't even have enough money for that. What he does have enough money for is a share of Boston and Maine. Strangely, and this is nothing like an XX scheme in this, he doesn't want one. Here's why. It makes it $2 a share. That's great, fantastic. You'd want it for that, right? But it's not going to gain any share value. All right, but it's still going to make money, right? No. Every turn that there's these in here, it's going to fall back. It is a liability right now. It's something you just do not want in your hands. And that's a painful, painful situation. So he's going to hold his little piddling amount of money. He doesn't have enough to buy the Penn at 74. He's got $62. That's not enough to buy anything. Maybe somebody will start something and he can buy a share of something that'll make him some cash. The third player makes an extensive shift. He dumps all his C&O stock, which drops the value of the C&O, onto the guy holding 1 share of it. Now, unlike an XX game, you're able to get dumped on with just 1 share. Is it a terrible thing? Well, maybe, maybe not. The president throwing it away means that it dropped your stock value. All these shares in here means the stock value goes down. This guy's in a position where he has to hold this, which isn't terribly good income-wise, and he's got these NYNHs that aren't going to grow anymore. They're only going to degenerate. They produce a nice income right now, but they may not be worth holding. And meanwhile, all the good companies are getting eaten up. In this case, the IC, which shows up down here, started also at 66 bucks, which is allowed. It's the lowest price allowed at Tech Level 3. That's going to push the trains out quicker. That's going to make these companies that are being dumped less valuable. Holding companies in this game doesn't seem as worthwhile. It doesn't seem as important. It seems okay to throw one away to start a new one. That's not a feeling I'm used to in XX. Usually, that president's certificate, the double share or whatever, that's too worthwhile to give up unless you have a really good reason to do so. For example, you're raping the company. Here, the companies aren't terribly raped either, but they do become a losing proposition. Things like the B&M, which isn't making much money, doesn't have much opportunity to grow. Somebody would have to throw a lot of money in to make it work, and you could throw that money somewhere else, and it's got this permanent degeneration in play due to its value going down. Now, the question, of course, was, hey, did he really want the Illinois Central, or should he have stolen the other railroad? Well, I had some problems because of the ordering, and I just reversed, because when I started here, I then went to this player and then this player. I'm not going to reverse something else, another decision. Just one of those things that comes up to your mind, geez, I could have built RUs. No, seriously, I mean, it's obvious he would have been better off taking over the better company. But maybe he's just being friendly. My guess is not everyone's going to be that friendly, but we'll see. Well, in a sense, the being dumped on is not as dramatic as in an XX game. I don't have a company that's dying here that I have to throw my cash into. But it's still a significant penalty. I can't get rid of this certificate. I can't do anything with it because it's closed out here. I can't really do anything with these. I could sell a bunch of them, but then what do I do with the money? And they're actually reasonably productive. I didn't have enough cash to turn around and make anything of value with. It's a rough position player 5 went in. He just passed. Player 6 went and threw some money into the IC. He could have thrown it into the NYC. NYC needs money. There's no question. But floating, helping the other company has some value as well. That presents more of a challenge to some of the other players. Of course, it presents more of a challenge to the NYC as well. So that's one of the problems there. I'm not sure where that's going, but he decided he wanted to diversify because he can keep paying out and taking good amounts of money into the NYC and fueling its performance that way rather than stealing from it. What he didn't want to do, though, as opposed to an XX game, most XX games, is take established stocks. These all come with a burden now. They're going to go down in stock value. They're not worth it. You want the new company. You want the company. Why? Well, okay. First of all, the NYNH does make good money. $8 a share. Hey, that sounds great. But it's going to lose $6 of that. Okay, granted, it's actually $16 a share over 2 rounds, but it's going to lose $6 of that, so it only makes $10 a share. Whereas this sucker, you don't know quite where it's going to come out. It's going to make some money early on. It's going to make about 7 minus a train, $4 a share very early. It's not going to lose money, though. It's going to actually gain money on the track. So overall, it seems like it's just a better deal. I don't know. Anyway, we'll wrap back around, see if anybody's got cash or willingness to do anything else. I think the only person who possibly has the cash is here, and I don't think... No, indeed, no one has that cash, and we got to push prices down for the B&M, the NYNH, and the C&O. One thing I forgot to mention, this guy, the guy who started the pen, he now owns 50% of it as well. He's a little behind. He's behind by less than a share's value in money. Well, it's a B&M share, actually, in money. But he's in the game as far as he's concerned at this point. Certainly, I think he's in second place at the very least. A little bit of cleverness if things don't go completely perfectly in terms of... So if this guy doesn't make great choices, that's a range that can be made up. Yeah, he's got the obvious advantage. And, you know, if it were a game of stocks and bonds or something like that, where you can just buy certificates to cover the other person's holdings, he can make sure he's ahead of him. But he's got other problems to worry about too. He's got the NYC, which is not a weak company. It's actually cranking the most money right now. It just doesn't have that good long-term prospect that the pen is going to have with all those coal mines. All right, well, we'll start the business. Open things up with the old established good lines. First, the pen finally has enough money and the inclination. It had enough money for the 2-train. Buys itself a 3-train. Grabs a call up, making sure the yellow can't just grab 2 of them and insure themselves one. Makes a run that's not terribly big, even with that big train. What was it? 40, 60. I got a lot of trainage here, but not really the capability to move it all. Now, one of the questions is, maybe I should take 20 bucks back by decommissioning this. And I think the answer is, not yet. I'll decommission it next turn, perhaps, if I need to. I have a lot of track that I can build pretty easily. Well, I'm not going to need it next turn. I've got these coals I can add every turn. Yeah, I'm going to decommission this sucker and grab... Well, I screwed up. I didn't do it. Okay. See, the problem is I'm not using all these trains. And I could get another turn's worth of production if I build to another city, though. Or to 2 more cities. So if I hit Pittsburgh, which is 60 bucks, and something else, perhaps New York, but maybe Baltimore because it's cheaper, I can increase my income again next turn without using up one of my coal markers, because nobody's going to move into these and force me to use them. It'll slow down my income growth. But anyway, my income ended up not being terribly good. What? 40, 60 plus 2 coal puts me up to 140 minus 60. I'm only at 80, so 8 bucks a share. I didn't get a huge increase there. That's okay, except that I'm competing with people who are doing very well, like the NYC, which pushed its track out to Chicago and got its total operations up to 120 and paid out 12 a share with no problem. In both cases, though, we got our stock values up, and that's important. Now we're up to the new guy. Guys were started, even this guy with only 3 shares, with enough money to buy a current train and to build some track. Now, Purple was a little short on cash with only 3 shares out. They only made it to Springfield, but the income they made by paying out, and of course they want to pay out, it's not a huge amount of money, and it gives them a stock increase, is enough to fund their expansion down to St. Louis. And likewise with the IC, they're heading up to Chicago. These are the big money locations in there. They both have decent sized trains. They're going to want to expand them down to Fort Wayne, but presumably, and maybe get better trains. But right now, they're getting off to a pretty good start, making some decent money on a per share basis. So now we go to the established but crappy lines, the ones that have been abandoned. And, well, we'll see how they do. So far we haven't moved out of stage 3, so I think everybody's income is correct, but I'll double check that to make sure. It's hard to tell what to do with them. They don't have any expansion capability, really. I mean, for example, the NYNH, it's got 5 points of train, so I can build into 1 more city. I can't get to Philadelphia because Pittsburgh's still not been filled by the pen. The pen has refused to build track through all of its cities, thereby preventing everyone from using Philadelphia. That's been a really powerful hammer that they've used against people, so I got to hold off on any kind of expansion and increase on my income. Obviously not much in the way of movement with those rails, although the B&M managed to do something kind of cool. So for the NYNH, there's nothing they can do. They produce their money, they pay it out. A little bit goes into the company treasury. They're waiting on Philadelphia. That's their last increase. And from then on, they're kind of good with these 2 trains unless somehow they get enough money for a 5 train. They'll take a little dip in price at some point. C&O swallowed with only 1 share. Hey, why the hell not? $100 into the treasury. That puts it in a position where it can maybe expand a little bit. And at the very least, it doesn't put them in a troubled position where maybe they won't be able to make money. That's a big deal. Because these trains, some of them are almost a liability at this point. In fact, 2 of them are. They're actually losing money. I should be decommissioning 2 of those trains because they're costing me income. Oh well, I forgot. On to the B&M, the final one. Well, what did they do? They had enough money. Remember, they were close to it before to buy a new train. So they bought themselves their 3 train. They decommissioned one of their trains. They had to do that so they have enough money to go into New York next turn. They had to make their run and collect their income. They actually paid out so that they could increase the stock value. So this guy's 1 share made a little bit more, but that gave them enough money to go into New York. Otherwise, they could have increased stock value a couple of times. They're going to get another one when they go into New York, but they could have increased stock value when they discard that extra train. Actually, why is it an extra train? Well, it's an extra train for the same reason C&Os are. At $20 here, Hartford is losing money by being serviced by this 1 train. I could get rid of that 1 train and I'd make $10 more. That's the argument, that any cities that are only worth $20, they're actually losing you money, and by discarding it, getting some extra cash, you actually push your value higher. Anyway, onward. But what you want to do about that increase is questionable, because remember, you kind of want to time things so you get stock increases if you can. Or something. I don't know. But these are becoming less of a penalty, but not so long as there are some of them in there. You kind of have to scoop them all up if you want them, and that's a big expense. Why not start a new company if you have that kind of money? One that can expand and can grow and can become valuable and isn't just holding up shares. So I think those are going to kind of waddle around towards without really succeeding very far. And now we're at the position where the first 4 train is available. I don't know if anybody has that kind of money kicking around or the desire to buy it. NYC definitely could use it. I don't think they have the cash on hand yet, but they're kind of saving up towards it. Otherwise, we're waiting for another company to start for it. Okay, I don't know what I did with my calculations here, but let's see where we are. Penn extended into Pittsburgh and Baltimore and made some additional money that way, thereby paying out. They're kind of in this troubled position where they don't have enough money. He could only expand into 2 locations because he didn't have enough cash flow, because he keeps paying out and there's nothing showing up in here. At some point or another, he's got to swallow that, but he can't swallow, in my mind, so long as he keeps increasing his income. So he's got a lot of turns where he's increasing income and just can't do anything to get money in the treasury. The big old NYC stayed even running, but both of the new rails managed to push into new territory and get their stock value going further and further up. And you can kind of see what we're seeing here. The big lines, well, the NYNH finally got into New York, into Philadelphia, because the Penn opened up Pittsburgh finally. So you can see its value stabilized at a pretty good level, and it got an increase. Likewise, the B&M got an increase again by making it into New York. They still have a couple of cubes left. Maybe if they ever get enough money to afford this train, they'll upgrade and be able to be a fairly viable and reasonable company again. Right now, with only 1 certificate in anybody's hand, it's not that impressive at this point. But, there are a lot of certificates people could buy and get it flush enough with money that it could buy a train. There's no reason to buy them from here when you can buy them from here, except for the effect on the stock price. But if you're going to make the company good by throwing a lot of money in it, people buy it, or you'll buy it and end up with 100% or whatever if it's making good money. And I think it's beginning to promise that it can do fairly well. It just wasn't going to produce good money without swallowing it or whatever. And then finally the CNO, and this is where things screwed up. Last turn, I think I swallowed like $100 into it. There's no way it made $100. I looked at its track and its situation, and it's running at about 30. I gave it a dump in stock value for that. I'm gonna pull some money out of here. It's swallowed again with that 30. It's got to get another train on it. It's a really troubled line. I dumped the 2-1 trains off of it. That may have actually helped it should have helped its value. I don't know how I got to a value of 100 though on it, because it made 110 maximum of its run. It had 4 points of trains, so it had 30, 60, 90 after I built this track. It had $100 run, but it had 4 trains at 30. It actually lost money if it did what it did last turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal that $100 out of the treasury, and I'm just going to call it kind of a wash there with the setback in the stock value, etc. It should be enough of a penalty. This guy is not making a lot of money off this thing. I'll figure out what the positions are for the market round, and I want to do that before I call it for the tape or whatever, largely because well, now I'll do it for the next tape. See, for the tapes it makes sense to know it at the beginning of the tape. For me, it's something I have to do right away, or else I may forget to do it. So we're kind of in this limbo zone here, and I'll load this one up because I think it's gone long enough by far.